And welcome to another episode of the Science Broadcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Papazafiropoulos. Today we're going to talk a little bit about a rather intriguing concept, and that is communication. While everyone agrees that communication is a problem, not in science per se, but necessarily in daily life and in business, we don't seem to be doing anything about it. To a very large degree, communication is a problem because we do not expend any effort to make communication a priority in whatever we do. In my career, I've had the pleasure of working in the field as an EMT, in operating rooms, in emergency rooms, and in aircraft cockpits, among other things, and of course, in science labs as a scientist. So why I mention those things? They have one thing in common, and that thing is good communications. What I mean by this? In aviation, communications is important that they're transferred timely and correctly to avoid loss of life. The same is true in the operating room. The same is true on the field if you're working as an EMT. The same is true in the emergency room. So in places that communication clearly leads to a very negative impact, we take the effort and communicate well, and we see that in those work environments, we do not have communication issues. We do not face the same communication problems we do face in other aspects of our life. So what do we do different? First of all, we use the language correctly. We don't agree that using the language incorrectly is okay as long as you communicate. And the problem with that is you really don't communicate. Using the language incorrectly leads to incorrect communication, leads to problems. So what do we have to do to communicate correctly is start using the language correctly, because really in day-to-day life it is rather difficult and not really logical to employ the communication safeguards we employ to those fields that I mentioned, for example, the cockpit of an aircraft. But we need to stop using the language incorrectly. Words have meaning, and it's not enough to communicate within a small group of people. It is important that we use the words as they are meant to be used. One of my least favorite things, I do a lot of flying as a passenger, and there's a vast difference between the communication that happens in the cockpit and the communication that happens between the airlines and the passengers. One of the things that really annoy me is when the airlines talk about their final destination. All destinations are final. That's what the word means. Destination comes from destiny, means outcome, means the end. There is no such a thing as an intermediate destination. There is a stop prior to the destination, potentially, but all destinations are by definition final. We sound really stupid when we talk about our final destination. It's like talking about our cool or our hot water heater. What kind of nonsense is that? Hot water doesn't need to be heated. It is actually hot. A water heater heats water. A hot water heater does not exist. We don't need such a thing. We don't need to heat hot water. It's already hot. So why we're doing all those silly mistakes, along with the overuse of the preposition pre. Pre means before. So a preheated oven is called before heating. Before an oven is heated, it is actually cold. So a pre-drilled hole is not a hole. We haven't done anything to it. A pre-boarded aircraft is not boarded. So when they say we need to pre-board, what do they mean? Are they going to leave you behind? Because my friends, you and I right now are pre-boarded. We are in a state before boarding. So there is no sense. Pre-boarding means before boarding. So when you're in your gate a few minutes before your flight starts boarding, you're actually pre-boarding. You are before the boarding process starts. Why don't they say we're going to now start boarding? You cannot pre-board, you can only start boarding and then say what they're going to board. Do we gain anything by using incorrect grammar and incorrect meaning? No. We're not going to start our boarding with families with children that need extra time. Why we need to say we now need to pre-board families with children that need extra time? That makes absolutely no sense. Let's board the poor people and get on with our trip. We need to stop saying things that make absolutely no sense. We need to stop pretending that we use the language in a fancy way, and as a result, we actually show how stupid we are and how little we understand the language that we proclaim to use. You might have guessed, I speak more languages in addition to English. And it has always been intriguing to me as I've studied various languages, how American English, the language we use in our country, is probably the worst way to speak English when you compare it, let's say, to our British counterparts or even our Australian counterparts. And I'm not talking about difference in accent and pronunciation here. I'm talking about usage mistakes. We say things, I'm going to take a shower. I'm quite confident that most everyone watching this video that is an English-speaking person, at some point in their early schooling, maybe around grade 2 or 3, had a poor teacher that says, never use action verbs with no action. I'm going to take my dog to the park. Take to. Where are you taking your shower to? You're not taking your shower anywhere. You're not disassembling your shower and moving it to some place. What you're trying to say is that you're going to have a shower. The action is on you, not the shower. You are going to put yourself in the shower and wash yourself. So why don't you say I'm going to have a shower or I'm going to wash? Why say things wrong when saying it correctly not only facilitates communication, but let's face it, makes you look smarter and lets you look more prominent? Why we keep doing that? Why we're saying things like, I'm going to get on the plane? I mean, this is very, very simple English. You do not get on planes. Evel Knievel got on planes. You have a ticket. Hopefully they will let you fly in the plane, in the cabin, on your seat. Not on the plane, on top of the cabin, where it is rather loud and windy and cold. Very, very silly, stupid things that we use, and we say, well, they are part of the language now. We have to accept them. And one of the most common misconceptions when that happens is people point to the dictionary. See, it's in the dictionary. Well, unfortunately, dictionaries do not define language. They record it. Linguists define language. The linguistics is the science, or the scientific approach, better, to how language operates and how language is defined. So we do not define language in dictionaries any more than encyclopedias used to define anything. Encyclopedia reported. They were telling you what things were. Dictionaries report common usage. Now, common usage does not mean correct usage, means a usage that has started being accepted. By whom? By everyone. But do you want to be everyone or you want to be someone? Let's take, for example, the word Google. Very few people knew in the beginning what even it meant. Very few people knew that Google refers to a number. But that aside, probably most people now do know that Google refers to a very large number. But that fact aside, Google is a noun. However, it has become a verb. I will Google it. No, you won't. I Google, you Google, he, she, it Googles, we Google. No, nonsense. You will look it up using Google. The verb is either look up or use. I will use it up on Google. That's correct usage of the language. I will use Google to look it up. Use is the verb here. Every sentence must have a verb and must have a noun and must have an action of some sort, right? The action is not necessary. You can say, I will do it. I guess you can say the action is eat, but it is not as well defined. And this is where our problems start. Why American English has lost definition of what the terms we use are on a day-to-day basis. And why we change English to this form of English that deteriorates as we use it more and more, deteriorates through time. Now, there are languages that have existed for millennia, and they are used to a very similar form that they used to be used today. Greek is a very old language, as you probably can imagine, and it has been used very similarly for eons. German is a reasonably old language. Did you know that English was the only language that when we went to the moon could not automatically come with a new word for the action of approaching and touching the face of the moon? So what we said, landing on the moon. Well, that sounds good, right? Well, of course, the problem is that landing means approaching and touching the face of the Earth. That's what landing means, right? We cannot approach and touch the face of the Earth on the moon. You see how silly it is when you start looking at it, right? We have incorporated in our language a lot of Latin and a lot of Greek, and that is great, but then we need to use them correctly. Hyper means above. Hypo means under. It cannot mean anything else. That's what the meaning of those words are. Hyperallergenic means that it is very allergenic. Hypoallergenic means that it is not allergenic. Hypochondriac is a person that has a very low threshold for anything that to them feels abnormal, right? Hypo. A hyperchondriac is someone that has a very high threshold, so hyper, right? Hyperactivity, hypoactivity. Anything that uses this root of the word remains either over or under. The hypothalamus is a structure in the brain that is underneath the thalamus and other brain structure. So we need to be using our terms correctly. It is very important that we use the language. When I started this short video, when you do things that miscommunication can lead to a very desirable outcome, the crash of an aircraft, the death of a patient, etc., we have taken steps to make sure that miscommunications do not exist, or at the worst case scenario are extremely minimized. In medicine, in aviation, in aerospace, we take communication very seriously, and we stress, when I teach my cadets, I stress to them how important it is to communicate precisely and succinctly. Another thing that it is very important is if we do not know the meaning of the word, let's not use it, right? Often I see people, I do see it a lot with my students, when they write papers and they try to use terms to be scholarly and they end up really hurting themselves because they use the wrong term. Using the wrong term does not make you look scholarly, make you look ignorant, because that lets me know you don't know what that word means. And very often, if you are one of my students, you know that I write, what does this mean? When I write that in a paper, I'm really indicating to you that you use the wrong word. Now, we all do that accidentally, and most definitely I do it accidentally. No one is ever perfect in anything they do. And I'm not talking about an accidental usage. I'm talking about a consistent usage of a term in a way that does not really meet the definition of that term. We need to stop doing that. We need to stop pre-doing things because it is just silly. We need to stop saying things like final destinations. We need to stop saying things like the exact same. Could it be the exact opposite? The word exact and same are synonyms, meaning they mean the same thing. Synonyms, right? The exact same, that's meaningless. It makes you look very silly. And we like to do that when we want to give emphasis somehow, not realizing that two words are synonyms, we put them next to each other. A catastrophic disaster. Are there non-catastrophic disasters? Are there pleasant disasters? Are there disasters that do not relate to a catastrophe? Or when we use words totally outside of context. For example, I hear the weather people talking about a weather event. Really? Can I buy tickets to that? Is it expensive? Is it planned? A weather event. Well, that makes absolutely no sense. There is a weather phenomenon. There may be weather observations. There may be expected weather, but there's no such thing as weather event. It makes absolutely no sense. We need to improve our language communications so we'll become better and we'll look more interesting, will look more intelligent, and will be taken more seriously when we use the language correctly, rather than the nonsense that we engage in currently, saying words without really understanding what they mean. I hope this little short episode of the Science Broadcast gave you some feedback that you need and you can use in your daily life. Speaking of that, I just thought of something. When people say I personally, once you put I, definitely means personally. You don't need to add the word personally. I hope you have a great week, and I'm going to try to keep those episodes coming up more frequently. I posted 2 episodes so far this week. So hopefully I will see you next week with another short episode relating a little more to science and more scientific exploration things. This is the Science Broadcast, and from Dr. John Papazafiropoulos, farewell, my friends.